Ready? We are the African fuels that sets by the kind of force that will not be stopped or handled. You need especially the CD that said that black population too. Labor is one that forced the production that can be used in opposition that's going to be impacted by the rich of this indicates that against the creation. The valuation that sustains capitalism now. Our arguments about reordering our relationship to labor. Labor is fucking inevitable. It's not that labor is inevitable. Production is inevitable. It's about reordering our relationship to production to be not in opposition to black women. Our operations are external of itself, but rather should be made for itself. Now that creates a rupture in the ability for capital to be able to create a value into the flesh. Because it means that we determine our own value intrinsic to itself. It's not a limit about who creates the most value, but rather that we just have the ability to be able to say, no, there are three impacts of the average going to be toxic masculinity, which is conceded and indicates that it is the ability for us to create a collectivity among black men, poor people, and black women that's usually that's independently slicing us. And this also separates our ability to be able to redefine masculinity and redefine blackness on the terms of how we can create a particular collective action. This is a prerequisite to your arguments about collectivity because it indicates that through our affirmative embracement of that type of carefree orientation towards labor allows us to deal with those forced separation, separate patterns that exist. That's what they say. Self-care is the back personal tragedy. They have not answered the back on warrant indicates that the requirement of us to not be able to self-care and try to push back and create a movement against the structures of violence that exist external to ourselves creates the impact of current watching unique forms of psychological suicide, which is the impact of the They say this is not the best place to do our arguments that it's not contingent on the battle, but rather contingent on the ability for us to be able to say no to the particular requirements of the debate space that says that we must do this in a certain way. Now the director's argument indicates that the necessary security itself is necessary prerequisite, i.e. I won't be able to understand what policy maker I'm able to promote for if I don't know myself or what is best for my particular community, which means that we are always going to be the prerequisite. That's the end goal. No, our end goal is creating a particular form of intrinsic value or sacred value that we can use to externalize, create a better form of policy person. But that is why the affirmative vote of the affirmative should be a prerequisite. Additionally, they say that there's no dissent at the top Kelly, but our argument is that the requirement for us to work within a particular imperfect system leads back to the impacts of the affirmative because they require us to engage in a form of policy making that is uniquely detrimental, lead back to the impacts of psychological violence. Now they have also seen silence, which is going to be a dissent to their interpretation because we never have the ability to be able to have conversations about the way in which psychological violence and racialized and sexualized violence happens within the debate space underneath their world debate, which means underneath the world debate that allows for a politics of silence to be articulated to that form of violence and pushes it to the process that allows for it to be sustainable. Now the top Kelly debate, they say if the ballot is not going to be good, no, the way which we can change this fucking space is to give us the ballot. The only way in which that has actually changed the debate space is through the big schools like fucking Georgetown losing ballots in the context of the way in which the debate space worked. The example is the press cake that literally caused to show how black people were not getting press, and that leads back to people literally fundamentally changing their press and changing the black press visibility within particular spaces proves that us getting the ballots is a challenge to the particular method that exists now. Paternalism, they say that it means every argument is black. No, our argument is that it's particularly paternalistic because it can control the way in which the discussion necessarily takes place. That links back to our unique claim on the app indicates that the world and white society already determined what and how black women necessarily need to reduce the impact of this is that we create a unique form of results on our psychological violence because if we don't produce the right way, we'll always lose the debate, which means that you always lose the debate because your production was never good enough. Additionally, their top version of the act, they say white taxes, that does not solve the act or solve the discussion about silencing and how that happens in terms of space. They say transportation, that does not solve that for the toxic masculinity portion of the act. Our argument is that the debate will never be about the context of which the one they see is discussing forms of violence internal to this space, which means that their interpretation uniquely externalizes our ability to have engagement. Additionally, they say for candidates to create a better type of debate we present a stasis. Our argument is that use of a stasis in their model is particularly used to exclude the descriptions by which necessarily engage. They are still good fundamental conversations about the preparedness argument. They conceded that preparedness is inaccessible, but in context of the affirmative UMKC, Kansas, Wake Forest, all these teams are literally can contest the one they see and had no conversation about the rest, which improves the paternalism argument and the impact of that is the externalization of black scholarship. They literally get to exclude our work and say that you don't know how to be a good advocate because you have no good decision making skills, which is paternalism par excellence because it literally excludes the work that black people literally do in this place. Additionally, they say that we need to have they say the debate is critical to dialogue. We should not focus on the individual. Falsifying doubly argument from the campaigns indicates that we don't focus on the individual allows us to become complacent with the forms of intercommunal violence that exists within the debate space because we can just read a policy act about carbon tax. Additionally, our arguments that they control, they can try to control how competition happens in space, that's a link to capital. But I get to that the next one. They say that production is never when we ain't that above. They say that presumption is particularly anti-black because we already guilty of proven innocent. That's the sensible for niggas to prove our uniqueness. In addition, they say that we have the they say that they say the interpretation is predicated off of inclusion. Our argument is that they exclude the particular understandings of the resolution contingent on our fleshly scales of justice. They say that doesn't matter. Our argument is that there are unique forms of privilege and whiteness that are in state when we go to the debate. They say it's inevitable, but our argument is that we should be able to rectify that with about avoiding affirmative forces to have an interpersonal conversation and community conversation to be able to deal with the unique forms of violence that we are facing capital now. They have to see the strong platform which impacts our ability to link debate that indicates that the requirement for us to be able to create a strategy for every fucking body reifies the same type of myth that a strong black woman is that she can resolve a strategy for us. But there are two impacts. This first is internalization of psychological violence, which is the impact of the app, and also the impact is that leads back to the hypervaluation of their mental evidence because it requires the firm to create a strategy to deal with solitude, and then that turns back their link vision. They don't understand the argument about black women arguments that production necessarily happened, but taking our production away from the structure of society and rather turning it inward has two reasons why we saw. First, it creates an intrinsic value that cannot be feedback into the structure of the structure of academics or labor that can be substantiated by the market. Now the permutation, there's no offensive reason to reject the permutation. It's a best method. It's a best it is an active collectivism that is able to challenge the structure of capital that exists within our flesh. This is the topic argument. They say that that's a metric, but our argument is that overvaluing structures and structures necessary to understand how those structures get performed in the first place.
Hello again, and we are back, and it's time to evaluate the 1AR. Something that's useful when evaluating game tape is to think about the intended strategy, then evaluate the execution of said strategy, then consider roads not taken by the speech. If you apply this process to your own debating, it creates much room for improvement. So the biggest advantage Rutgers has going into the speech is that they're ordering claims about the nature of black women's oppression and what impacts it's tied to, psychological violence, silencing, toxic masculinity, etc., are only contested tangentially by Georgetown, rather than directly. So what did the 1AR need to reckon with while leveraging that fact? First, the argument that Rutgers leaves no role for the neg. I would say there were three responses to this notion in the 1AR. One is this ballot key argument at the top of framework. Voting for us and against Georgetown is the only way practices change in debate. If the practices are really bad in debate now, you should vote for us. Two is the appeal towards presumption and the appeal towards topical versions of the AF, and all these sorts of procedural things are used to control black women's production. The third is that other debates prove engagement is possible without framework. This last response is the most direct towards Georgetown's claims about negative ground, but it would have been more useful to answer this portion of the debate more directly for a longer period, including providing some impact comparisons. The substance of these other debates that Rutgers is referring to isn't really elaborated on, and Georgetown has many contentions as to why the subject matter of Rutgers' AF is not apt for switch side debate. Delving through these a little bit more would have been optimal. Something that could have helped really clarify what Rutgers was saying was something I recently heard from Daryl Birch, which is offering up procedural objections to criticism that is related to structure and inequality only seeks to do damage control or minimize the potential for change rather than promote transformation. Rutgers is obviously getting at an idea like this, but saying it more directly instead of relying on implicit connection would probably be an improvement. So recall that from the analysis of the 2C, Georgetown had three main threads of defense that Rutgers should probably answer. They are: Rutgers' critique of production is not about debate, T is not exclusion, or in Rutgers' words, externalizes black scholarship, and topical plans can encompass a lot of the threads of Rutgers 1AC. The conversation about production and opposition to black women. Recall what Natalie says about this. Debate as a model of arguing requires two sides. It requires the burden of rejoinder, and it requires contradiction. So to say that any attempt at contradiction comes from a racist or controlling place is an easy way to shut down conversations, particularly in a switch side debate format. Then Natalie says lots of good arguments are talked about in debate, and lots of good arguments are not talked about in debate. And so to say something shouldn't be subject to switch side debate doesn't mean we were condemning or excluding the truth value of the idea, because lots of good ideas can never be included in the topic will inevitably be somewhat limited, and good arguments are also subject to losing a debate from time to time regardless. Then, an attempt at clarifying that Rutgers is talking about bigger structural things like capitalism, and debate is a distinct idea than what Rutgers, the main substance of Rutgers 1AC. And so the main thrust of the Wenyar in response to these arguments is less distinguishing away these arguments like we theorized after the block, or deconstructing them specifically in a line-by-line fashion, but is more a conceptual push that all these arguments function to exclude our affirmative. And our affirmative is key to solve big impacts like psychological violence. That means you need to vote F. But not doing the impact comparison explicitly could come to hamper this strategy. We talked about Rutgers' response to topical version a little while ago. The only additional thing I would mention is a lot of the re-clarifying of the AV seems to be done with an eye towards the CapK instead of potential topical versions. This mainly happens at the top of the case page. Focusing more attention on the latter instead of the former probably would have been the optimal approach. So going into the final two rebuttals, I'm sure we have two teams that are confident that they're winning the majority of the arguments they're going for. That's because a lot of the clash has been tangential or implicit rather than explicit and direct. So we're going to see if the 2NR and the 2A are making any direct moves to disrupt this pattern.